රින් වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට රුපියල් 199යි.
Tonight, Mission Impossible. Sri Lanka's IMF negotiation team takes flight for make or break $4 billion talks that hinge on assurances of change. Changing places. A new cabinet is set to take oaths tomorrow with fresh faces to solve old problems. No such plans. As Gulf-face protests continue strong for day 9, the army refutes rumors of a hard crackdown, promising to uphold the constitution. Break free. Sri Lanka's Christians celebrate the resurrection of Christ the Saviour. As the Cardinal says, Sri Lanka can rise too.
Resurrection of this nation is possible, but we must stand together and resist all this evil.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Sunday, the 17th of April, 2022.
Nelly, මතකෙන් ගිලිහුණු black shine කෙස් කලඹක රහස sunset black shine සමගින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Bringing you the latest from across the island, this is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. According to political sources, a new cabinet is set to be sworn in tomorrow. However, a number of former ministers, including former media minister Dallas Alaperma, have refused to take up portfolios in the new cabinet. Meanwhile, the leaders of some parties are expected to request the Speaker to allocate separate seats in Parliament for the 42 independent members of Parliament. Political sources have hinted at the naming of a new cabinet of ministers tomorrow, adding that arrangements have been made for the swearing-in ceremony as well. Further, the first meeting of the new cabinet is expected to be held tomorrow evening. In the meantime, the sources have added that the new cabinet is to be limited to 15 ministers and may not include some big names. These include former ministers Chamal Rajapaksa, Basil Rajapaksa, Namal Rajapaksa and Shashindra Rajapaksa. In addition, former ministers Gamini Lokuge, Bandula Gunawardena, Mahindananda Alutgamage, Johnston Fernando and Rohita Abegunawardena too will not be named in the new cabinet. Instead, sources say that several new faces are set to be included. However, no changes are to be made to the existing list of state ministers. Meanwhile, former Minister of Media Dallas Alaperma and former State Minister Jeevan Thondaman have announced on Twitter that they will not be accepting portfolios in the new cabinet. In addition, former Minister of Public Security Rear Admiral Sarath Virasekara also took to social media to announce his intention to forego any ministerial posts. In the meantime, the 40-plus parliamentarians who declared themselves as independent candidates are expected to request the Speaker to allocate separate seating in the House when Parliament sessions recommence on the 19th of April. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Ali Sabri, Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe and Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardena took wing to Washington, D.C. for crucial make-or-break talks with the International Monetary Fund this morning. The talks, if successful, will hopefully see Sri Lanka receiving a sum of $4 billion in 5 tranches. However, all rests on the assurances that the government gives to the IMF on its readiness to implement the necessary structural changes required. Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Piris last week held a briefing with the envoys of donor nations to inform them of the current economic situation in the country. The briefing was attended by Finance Minister Ali Sabri and Governor of the Central Bank Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe. At the meeting, the diplomatic community was informed of the measures being put in place and the preliminary arrangements set to be discussed with the International Monetary Fund next week. The ministers also took the opportunity to invite donor nations to look at the possibility of facilitating bridging finance to tide the island over during the intervening period. Meanwhile, the delegation led by the Minister of Finance Ali Sabri left the island early this morning for discussions with the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. The delegation includes Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe and Secretary to the Ministry of Finance Mahinda Siriwardena. They are scheduled to visit the headquarters of the International Monetary Fund for talks scheduled to take place from the 19th to the 24th of April. If successful, Sri Lanka is expecting to secure up to $4 billion. If the IMF agrees to the proposal set out by the Sri Lankan team, it is set to be made available under 5 tranches, enabling Sri Lanka to secure some semblance of credibility in the global financial sector. However, the financial assistance from the International Monetary Fund will depend on Sri Lanka's readiness to implement a set of financial reforms to ensure fiscal stability. During the visit, close attention is to be paid to the exact recommendations that will be implemented and how. Ugandan corporate entity Serenity Group has issued a statement denying that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa holds a staggering $10 billion in investments with the company. Labeling the allegations as inaccurate, baseless and untrue, the company has also labeled the authors of the claims as misguided individuals who have no knowledge of the company's inception and growth. The company plans to issue a more detailed statement in the coming days. Responding to an article circulating on social media that alleges Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa holds investments of a staggering $10 billion in Ugandan corporation Serenity Group's company has issued a categorical denial. The statement said that the company categorically and vehemently rejects the claims and allegations as inaccurate, baseless and untrue. It also accused the author of the claims as being misguided individuals who have no knowledge of the company's inception and growth that has been achieved through debt financing from reputed private banks in Uganda and Sri Lanka. The statement also alleged that not only have the authors taken most of the information included in the allegations, such as company names, photographs and locations from Serenity's official website and social media accounts without its consent and reposted with distorted meaning, it also alleges that the authors have not contacted company officials for comments nor feedback to date. The Serenity Group adds that although the company chose not to engage and respond to baseless, cheap political propaganda at first, they have since decided to issue the notice to the public for clarity and full disclosure in protection of their goodwill and the reputation of their organization. The company promises to publish a detailed statement in the coming days. Now, Christians all over the world celebrated the resurrection of Christ today. However, for hundreds of Sri Lankans, the stain of 3 years ago still remains. In his sermon at Easter Sunday service at St. Lucia's Cathedral today, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, urged the public to escape from what he termed a cage of narrow-mindedness that divided and destroyed the nation for the past 74 years. However, just as Jesus rose on Easter Sunday, he believes that Sri Lanka too can be resurrected anew if the people stand firmly and resist evil and corruption.
Easter Sunday, the greatest feast of the Christian faith, was celebrated by Christians all over the world today. According to the Christian faith, Easter Sunday is the day that Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind, was resurrected from the dead after his crucifixion and death on the cross. The day marks the end of what is known as the Paschal Triduum. The Paschal Triduum is 3 days in the Holy Week, beginning from Maundy Thursday to Easter Sunday, that marks the Passion, Crucifixion, Death, Burial, and Resurrection of Jesus. Easter Sunday also concludes the season of Lent, the 40 days which Christians fast and make sacrifices in remembrance of the 40 days Jesus Christ spent in the desert after his baptism during the journey to Jerusalem. The Christian faiths across Sri Lanka joined in Mass last night to celebrate the Easter Vigil and Sunday Mass with a hope and renewed faith. The head of the Catholic Church in Sri Lanka, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, presided over the Mass at St. Lucia's Cathedral last night, where he called on the faithful to free Sri Lanka from the cage of corruption for a new beginning.
Our life is just a short existence, but we can give so much of joy and happiness to all our brothers and sisters. Share life in a beautiful way, selflessly. See how much people are suffering. See the amount of anger and hate that is being generated by man's selfishness. You can see that in our own Sri Lankan society. After independence, we have destroyed each other. We have created structures of corruption. We have created slavery. We have placed ourselves inside a cage limited by narrow-mindedness with regard to our racial and religious belonging, with regard to the freedom that we can give everybody else. There is so much of corruption. We cannot even trust anyone anymore. We always think that all the people are corrupt because corruption has become endemic. It is not only the powerful ones who are corrupt, but even the powerless ones are corrupt. The way we serve each other without any zeal and enthusiasm. For 74 years, we have destroyed our beautiful motherland. And the height of that destruction, dishonesty, and lying and cheating was the way we faced the Easter Sunday attacks and the way we have gone about in investigating and finding out who really did it. Resurrection of this nation is possible. We can do it. But we must stand together and resist all this evil that has taken hold of all of us.
Christians today also mark almost 3 years since a fateful day in 2019 when hundreds of innocent worshippers at churches across the island fell victim to a brutal terrorist attack. Even though 3 years have elapsed, justice has not been delivered to the victims and those responsible remain free despite assurances by the government to the contrary. As such, a protest march was carried out from St. Lucia's Church to Kotahena to St. Anthony's Church Shrine in Kochikade that was one of the targets of the attacks of that fateful day. In addition, a separate protest was worked off in Rajagiriya, demanding justice for the Easter Sunday attack victims. In the meantime, in his Easter Sunday message, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa continued off assurances that his government will deliver justice to the terror attack's victims. The president stated that the tragic experience of the brutal Easter Sunday attack 3 years ago continues to resonate in our minds. The head of state added that justice will be delivered to all the victims of the Easter Sunday attack by enforcing the law against all responsible parties by means of proper investigations. He added that while the message of Easter continues to be one of hope and courage, the enlightenment, positivity, and spiritual strength of Easter invites all of us to overcome the challenges caused by the darkness of doubt and sin in one's life and the world.
And we'll be back with more local news right after this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Today marks the 9th day of the anti-government protest at Goldface Green, or Gota Gogama as it has become known today. Furthermore, other protests urging President Gotabaya and his government to resign were worked off in several areas today as well. Due to the growing public discontent towards the government, more protests have been planned by various factions of the public, starting from tomorrow as well.
The Goldface protesters demanding political change have issued calls for the agitation to be expanded to other sites in the island. Using social media posts, they have now invited members of the public to start new protest sites in their respective districts as branches of Gota Gogama. In response, today the Kandy branch of Gota Gogama was declared open. This was followed by another branch that was open in Nitambo as well. Meanwhile, at the main protest site in Colombo, demonstrations worked off for the 9th consecutive day, showing that the massive anti-government campaign is far from over. Further, the protesters have also requested the National Hospital in Colombo to assist them with urgent medical supplies as well. Meanwhile, at the auspicious time of 7:04 am, protesters gathered for the customary anointment of oil, a tradition of the Singal and Tamil New Year which was conducted by Venerable Dr. Omal Pesobithatera. With Easter Sunday also falling today, a group of protesters who lost their loved ones from the Easter Sunday attack conducted a protest demanding justice to them, which has not occurred so far since its investigations began in 2019. Meanwhile in Gaul, an anti-government demonstration calling for the president and the government to resign worked off this morning at a site being referred to the Gaul branch of the Gota Gogama. However, a tense situation erupted as the police forcefully removed tents erected at the location. However, this did not deter the protesters who continued the demonstrations again at the same location and set up a new and much larger tent afterwards. Meanwhile, more anti-government protests were worked off in several more districts, including in Kurunegala. Several more anti-government protests are scheduled to work off in the coming days. Tomorrow, journalists are expected to gather near the Bandaranayake statue at Goldface at 5 p.m. to draw the attention to the issue of media freedom and to demand accountability over attacks on media personnel. Further, the journalists are expected to begin a protest march towards the presidential secretariat to support the ongoing protest. What's more, the Freedom of University Teachers Associations are expected to express their obligations towards the government and support the anti-government protest in Goldface Green on the 19th of April. In addition, on the 20th of April, a trade union collective has decided to declare a national day of protests and have called for an island-wide strike at state sector offices. Meanwhile, the Sri Lankan nationals overseas continue to hold their own protests as well.
Meanwhile, the Jatika Janabalawega's protest march from Bergola to Colombo to call for the removal of the incumbent government began today. This three-day march is expected to conclude on Tuesday the 19th of April at the Lipton Circus in Colombo. Party leader Anurukumara Dissanayake stated today that the protesters have no intention of joining up with the protesters at Gota Gogama.
With mass anti-government demonstrations continuing throughout the island, the Jatika Janabalawega on the 13th of April promised a mass protest campaign beginning from today in a bid to strengthen the anti-government protests. As promised, they began their protest march from Berola at 9 am. The protesters demanded the appointment of a government free of corruption following the resignation of the incumbent government.
අපි කළ යුතු වන්නේ විරෝධයෙන් එහාට ගිහිල්ලා මේ රටේ ආර්ථික සංවර්ධනයත් නීති විධානයේ ආධිපත්‍යයත් වංචාවෙන් දූෂණයෙන් තොර ආණ්ඩුවකුත් වංචාවෙන් දූෂණය කරන ලද දීපල පවර ගන්න ආණ්ඩුවකුත් වංචනිකයන්ට දූෂණයට දඬුවම් දෙන ආණ්ඩුවකුත් අපි ගොඩනගා ගත යුතුයි. මේ ආණ්ඩුව පළවා හරින කල්පනා කරන සියලු දෙනාට එකතු වෙන්න පුළුවන් මධ්‍යස්ථාන අපි ගොඩනගලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මේ ආණ්ඩුව පළවා හැරලා මේ රට ගොඩනගන්න පුළුවන් දියුණුතම සංවිධානය අද බිහි වෙලා තිබෙනවා ජාතික ජනබලවේගය.
Meanwhile, the three-day protest march ended at Wadua today. Tomorrow, the protesters are expected to begin from Wadua and end at Moratuwa. The march will continue on Tuesday at Lipton Circus. According to the Jatika Janabalawega, the march will not join the mass protest at the Goldface Green.
The Sri Lanka Army says that rumours of it preparing to take on civilian protests is false and that it plans to uphold the constitution at all times. The army adds that it will only step in if the police request it to do so in the event of a violent uprising. Yesterday, Samagi Janabalawega parliamentarian Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca issued an appeal to the Secretary of Defence General Kamal Gunratna and Army Commander General Shavendra Silva to think long and hard before following orders to suppress the wave of peaceful citizens' protests being carried out across the country. Taking to social media yesterday, Fonseca stated that he does not expect heroes who spearheaded a humanitarian operation under his leadership be disgraced and discredited in front of the entire world. He added that due to this, they should think hundreds of thousands of times before implementing illegal orders issued by corrupt rulers that go against the rights of the people. Further, he warned the government that any attempt at suppressing civilian demonstrations will be condemned by the international community. In the meantime, in a statement issued in response to Fonseca's appeal, the Sri Lanka Army has said that it would uphold the constitution and refrain from resorting to any violence targeting anti-government protests across the island. The statement also rejected as rumours claims of military personnel being trained to deal with the growing numbers of protesters seen across the island, especially at Goldface Green. However, the statement adds that the military will assist the police only in the circumstance that assistance is sought by them to defend the nation, uphold the constitution and restore peace and order in the event of a violent uprising. The Ministry of Defence also, however, warns of elements working towards ulterior motives during the peaceful protests and also warns that legal action will be taken by the police against anyone destroying or damaging public or private property under the pretext of peaceful protests. Meanwhile, the official website of the Sri Lanka Police Department was hit with a cyber attack this morning. When reached for comment, the police department confirmed this but stopped short of providing any further details on the cyber attack. After being down for several hours, the official website of the Sri Lanka Police has now been restored. With mass protests calling on the government and the president to step down from power, Tamil National Alliance MP M.A. Sumandiran has made a suggestion to Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to ensure that a bill to abolish the executive presidency is brought to Parliament. TNA MP Sumandiran had made these comments after the Premier had called on the TNA MP to recommend the best way forward given the situation in the country. Nevertheless, the MP reassured that progress is made with regard to drafting the necessary legislation for the abolishment of the executive presidency.
Calls for the removal of the executive presidency has been one that has been made throughout Sri Lankan history. However, despite the continuous promises made with regard to the abolishment of the executive presidency during the election time, nothing in this regard has ever materialized. However, there seems to be some progress regarding the drafting of the necessary legislation to rid the country of the executive presidency, following the meeting that was convened by the Tamil National Alliance MP M.A. Sumanthiran on the 6th of April this month.
The responsibility was given to some lawyers, and I think the process is now complete together with translations. When I return to Colombo, we'll have a look at it and then decide on the next steps to be taken.
In the meantime, given the ongoing crisis at the moment, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa had met with TNA MP M.A. Sumanthiran earlier last Monday to get his opinion on the best way forward. Speaking to AdaDerana English News, MP Sumanthiran stated that he had suggested to the Premier that the most dignified way for the government to leave would be after bringing about the bill that would abolish the executive presidency.
Only way I thought was the way forward for the President and the government to exit with dignity was to bring the bill to abolish executive presidency from the government itself. When I said that, he readily agreed. He said that's been our policy. I told him, although that's been your policy since 1938, and although you were president for 10 years, it wasn't done. The President can now announce that what many people promised and never did, that he was doing it, and also announce that once that process is over, necessary referendum and the general election for Parliament can be held on the same day, because thereafter Parliament would have separate powers than it has now. He said this can only take effect after the current president's term ends. I disagreed with him and I told him that's a non-starter, that it must take effect immediately. In the meantime, if the president had taken no steps, then I don't see anyone disrupting an interest.
Meanwhile, the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka announced today that due to the lack of fuel in the country, the duration of power cuts will have to be extended from tomorrow until Wednesday. As such, power cuts of 4 hours will take place across all areas from A to L and P through W.
There is still no end to the fuel queues seen at refueling stations across the country. In addition, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation's decision to add a cap on the quantity of fuel that can be dispensed to various types of vehicles has caused the lines at refueling stations to get longer. Some people were seen just bringing their fuel tanks of their motorcycles to the refueling stations as well, which is a better alternative to pushing their bikes. In the meantime, a group of people in the area of Ruanvallas have staged a protest blocking the Avissavella-Kegol road after a fuel station in the area had abruptly decided to stop issuing fuel at 11 p.m. last night to the people in a queue. This severely inconvenienced commuters and led to heavy congestion in the area. Similarly, there were more protests by irate members of the public in the areas of Bibile and Vallavaya due to the lack of fuel. In the meantime, according to the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, power cuts will be extended from tomorrow until Wednesday due to the lack of fuel. As such, areas falling between A to L and P to W can expect power interruptions for 3 hours between 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and a 1 hour and 20 minutes power cut from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. tomorrow. Meanwhile, the CEB has requested the power cuts of 4 hours and 50 minutes for Tuesday and Wednesday. Accordingly, the power cuts for areas A to L and P to W will have power cuts for 3 hours and 20 minutes between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. and 1 hour and 30 minutes between 6 p.m. and 10:30 p.m.
The first term for government schools will resume tomorrow, however, without the 1 hour extension of school hours that was previously ordered to cover the missed syllabus. According to the Ministry of Education, the decision was revoked due to possible student transportation issues stemming from the fuel crisis.
The first school term for government schools is scheduled to resume tomorrow after 2 weeks of holidays that will conclude from today. Previously, the Ministry of Education had instructed schools to extend school hours by 1 hour to cover the syllabus due to the late start of the academic year. However, today Minister of Education Dinesh Gunawardhan announced that the decision on the extension has been revoked. The decision has been taken due to the possibility of student transportation being obstructed due to the ongoing fuel crisis in the country. In the meantime, the Ministry of Education announced that admission of students to Grade 1 classes for the year 2022 to government schools will commence on the 19th of April. The Ministry's Additional Secretary for School Affairs, Lalita Egodavalla, said that the principals of schools island-wide have been notified in this regard. However, Agodavala also said that there could be some delay in the admission of students to the first graded schools where there are problems with the appeal lists.
Now, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce has expressed dismay at the decision by the Securities and Exchange Commission to close down the Colombo Stock Exchange for the next 5 days. Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Vish Govindasamy, has written to the Chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka, Viraj Dayaratna, expressing dismay at the closure of the Colombo Stock Exchange for 5 days from tomorrow. Govindasamy says that the sudden closure of the market creates many challenges to local and foreign investors, as was seen during a similar closure at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. He has also listed out 3 main issues faced by investors. The first being that potential sellers are prevented from exiting the market at the time and price of their choice. The second, he says, this prevents potential buyers from acquiring shares at the time and price of their choice. And the third being that all investors will be unable to carry out valuations and mark to market their respective investment portfolios. Govindasamy adds that with circuit breakers in place to arrest any sharp movement in market indices, there is absolutely no need to close the market in this manner, which sends out a wrong signal to international investors. He adds that the closure will be seen by market participants as similar to the central bank's unsuccessful attempt to forcibly hold the exchange rate against market forces. With that, he has urged the SEC to reconsider the move and direct the CSE to operate freely even amid challenging market conditions, which will help safeguard its reputation as an investor-friendly stock market. Sri Lanka Cricket has appointed former Bangladesh under-19 cricket coach Naveed Nawaz as the assistant coach of the Sri Lankan national team. With that, the upcoming tour of Bangladesh will be the first tour which both newly appointed head coach Chris Silverwood and Nawaz will be in charge of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka Cricket has appointed former Sri Lankan Test and ODI player Naveed Nawaz as the new assistant coach for the Sri Lankan national team on a 2-year contract which is effective from the 1st of April. Prior to his appointment, Nawaz served as the head coach of the Bangladesh under-19 team, which won the Under-19 Cricket World Cup in 2020. His first national team tour will be the upcoming tour of Bangladesh. That will be the first tour of the newly appointed Sri Lankan head coach Chris Silverwood as well. Further, Chamin Nawaz will serve as the fast bowling coach, while P.L. Wijayatunga will be in charge of the spinners. The fielding and support coach will be Manoj Abe Vikrama. Mahinda Halangoda will be the team manager for the tour. Sri Lanka will play a 2-match test series during the tour of Bangladesh under the ICC World Test Championship. The first test match is expected to commence on the 15th of May in Chittagong. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.